All right, welcome back to the channel. So, Roy Jones Jr. says that Errol Spence Jr. needs to prove himself, and Roy Jones Jr. was talking about who do you have winning the fight between Errol Spence Jr. and Terrence Crawford. I'm about to break it down for y'all. Let's talk about it in this video. King Jr. got another video for y'all. So, Roy Jones Jr. was in a couple interviews lately, and Roy Jones Jr. was asked about what do he feel about Spence and Crawford fighting, and he says that it's about time this fight needs to happen. It needs to happen now because everybody's tired of talking about it, and this is one of the biggest fights in the sport of boxing. And Roy Jones Jr. stated that he sounded like Spence couldn't be potentially ready for Terrence Crawford yet, and Roy Jones Jr. feels like that he still needs to prove himself, and then he'll be ready for Terrence Crawford. And I have to disagree with Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr. Has been, last time he criticized somebody was way back since last year ago. I made a video about how Roy Jones Jr. I forgot who he was talking about, but Roy Jones Jr. was absolutely wrong, and Roy Jones Jr. once again is absolutely wrong. Spence does not need to prove himself because Spence has fought in 3 to 4 Hall of Famers. He fought Mikey Garcia. He fought Kell Brook. He fought Lamont Peterson. He fought Chris Algieri. You know, he fought a lot of guys that went to wars. You could say Danny Garcia, even though Danny Garcia, not the greatest boxer in the world, but he fought Danny Garcia. And the list goes on. And Sean Porter. Don't forget about Sean Porter as well. And the list just goes on and on. Errol Spence Jr. just has been carrying a heavy load since the beginning. He says he was going to make out and do. He says he's going to clean up his side of the street, and he's coming for Terrence Crawford. And I feel like Errol Spence Jr. does not need to prove himself no more than he have to. I feel like Roy Jones Jr. is favoring Terrence Crawford to win the fight because of the versatility of Terrence Crawford and the versatility that Roy Jones Jr. was back in his day until he got brutally knocked out by Antonio Tarver. But with that being said, I just think that Roy is absolutely wrong because Errol Spence Jr. doesn't need to carry more of the workload, and a lot of these fake boxing fans wants to see Errol Spence Jr. lose, and that's why a while back ago we were seeing that a lot of boxing fans, casual boxing fans, wanted Errol Spence Jr. Terrence Crawford doesn't have to fight Jerron Ennis. Let's put Errol Spence Jr. in there with him. So it just comes down to that point. So Roy Jones Jr., what does Errol Spence Jr. has to prove left? Okay. Because Errol Spence Jr. fought in the Hall of Famer names. Errol Spence Jr. fought the big names. Errol Spence Jr. brings in the pay-per-view bots. He brings in the fans. And what has Terrence Crawford done? You say that he's not ready for Terrence Crawford, but is Terrence Crawford ready for Errol Spence Jr.? Because we can flip this whole side question around. Because the only name that Terrence Crawford really have is Victor Postile and Sean Porter, the 2 solid fighters. But Terrence Crawford, I feel like Terrence Crawford has to prove himself. Errol Spence doesn't have to prove himself. But Roy Jones Jr. looks like he fanboying for Terrence Crawford. And cool, Roy, if you want to be a fanboy of Terrence Crawford, cool with you. If you feel like getting in your feelings on doing interviews, go ahead, cool, get in your feelings. But I have to disagree with you. Spence doesn't have to prove anymore to fight Terrence Crawford. Spence is already gunning for Terrence Crawford. He's on a mission to get undisputed from Terrence Crawford. And a lot of people have I'm gonna say a lot of people have Errol Spence Jr. beating Terrence Crawford, and I think Errol Spence Jr. is going to beat Terrence Crawford because of competition. Eventually, fighting guys that's not on your level, it's going to catch up with you. Now, I can say Terrence Crawford couldn't fight the best opposition because he was the best at that time, and there was really nobody at the best at that time. But when he moved up in weight, he had many opportunities to fight these guys, but he was getting cock blocked by Bob Arum and basically getting blackballed for the rest of his career. So Bob Arum lined him up with bum after bum after bum, and I think that is going to hinder Terrence Crawford of beating Errol Spence Jr. because it's the skill difference. It's a skill level, and there's always level to this when it comes to the sport of boxing. And I feel like that Terrence Crawford, if he's down on the scorecards and he's looking for aggression to knock you out, I think Terrence Crawford is going to lose his composure. And I think Errol Spence Jr. is going to stay on task and not lose his composure and continue to press the action against Terrence Crawford, because Terrence Crawford is looking for the knockout. He's not looking to box with you anymore. When Sean Porter was up on the scorecards, Terrence Crawford wasn't boxing anymore. Terrence Crawford was looking to get you out of there, and Terrence Crawford did get him out of there. I don't think it's going to be the same scenario with Errol Spence Jr., but I'm going to break it down for y'all when this fight really comes to fruition. But with that being said, Roy Jones Jr. says that Errol Spence Jr. needs to prove himself again. I don't think Errol Spence Jr. has anything left to prove. I feel like once he beats Jordanis Ugas, who's one of the best Cuban boxers, star boxers there is, I think that he's proven himself and he'll be ready for Terrence Crawford. And sometimes you just can't believe the stuff Roy Jones Jr., what comes out of this guy's mouth at the same time. With that being said, it is what it is. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment. This is your boy King Jr. I'm out of here. Peace.